Hello, welcome to everyone into a special launching event of the first documentary on the sustainable urban delta. This is the first one of an upcoming series of 3. This is truly a global event. Many people are watching from all over the world, from China to Africa, from Europe to the USA, Mexico, actually from anywhere. Today we share thoughts and insights with entrepreneurs and specialists about creating a more sustainable way to provide our cities with the food they need. And I will talk with several guests, of course, with Maini Prince. She's sitting over there. Who's the instigator of this all. It's all based on her vision that started about 10 years ago. We'll talk about that later. We also have special video guests. I'll turn to them. Henry Gordon Smith, he's from architecture. We'll talk to you later. Deng Xu, you're in Beijing, that's right? And you are from...
Yes, in Beijing.
Right, you're from Hortipolaris. So we have more guests. Gerben van Straten, he's CEO of Wallace, a company specialized in sustainable urban development. And we talked to Danielle Hirsch, and she's an economist and director of both ends, environmental and human rights organization. But first, Maini, how do you feel? It's your first documentary.
I'm happy, but I'm also very nervous at this moment, indeed. It is the first documentary, and with that also the first introduction to the foundation. But it was time. The crisis now already shows impact on food production and on food supply chains. But the climate change was already showing that too. And it was already causing injustice and pollution, and we had a lot of food waste, and also a significant part of the lack of healthy food in the world.
Because that's actually the thing. Your big issue started about 10 years ago about food in the cities.
It was the first time that I wrote it down. Was with I was invited to speak a lecture at the Social and Economic Board in the Netherlands, and it was about how to live well, how to have a good life in times of crises. So it's a kind of awkward to have now the situation that we have to rethink the same today.
Yeah. And it's actually more important than ever, because this crisis actually proves that it's highly necessary that we have our own food supply in the mega cities that there are on Earth, aren't they?
Yes, and I think nowadays it is not the question if it changes. So when do we need to change could then be the question, but it is really about, will we do it after this crisis? Or are we forced due climate changes anyway, and then we will look back to this crisis as a small wrinkle in time. So I very much believe, and that is where this story is about, the Sustainable Urban Delta, and why it started also 10 years ago, that we really need a vision. We need something that people can hold on, that we know where we're going to, and where do we spend now our money to save the economy, but what kind of economy are we going to save? So
we're going to spend thousands of billions of dollars or euros or whatever on restoring economy. But indeed, what kind of economy?
Yes, I mean, what I want to show is that there are already so many nice examples in the world. And we can learn from each other, and we can help each other. We can be creative and entrepreneurial in that way. We have so many talented people all around the world. So changing, and that is a fact, of course, too. So changing the existing system is incredibly difficult.
You say that technology is there, so we can do it. We can provide ourselves with food in the big cities. We can provide ourselves with clean energy.
Yeah.
That's actually what you say.
Yeah, and many cities are already starting to do that. So it is already happening. And cities they need to do it because they will be the drivers of radical innovations, of new sustainable solutions, because they are dealing with all those major problems in the cities. They're dealing with living areas to make that suitable for the people living there. They're dealing with the air quality, with lack of good water, with their sewage system, with their mobility. So they have so much problems. And then the fact is, okay, if you have multiple problems, let's then pick one out of it and start there. So start somewhere, and let's start then with food. And that is when the Netherlands came in for me.
Yeah, but why food?
Because it's so close to people, it is tangible. I mean, it's nice, huh? I mean, food, it's where it starts. And from out of food, you are also connected to water supply, and you're connected to energy, and you're connected to... So from there, you can also start thinking about how to develop a circular economy that we so badly need.
Because food is so closely related to ourselves, to our bodies.
Well, if we're not doing it, then we
No.
have a serious problem, because the climate change combined with the food production as we do it today, that one will hit us very, very hard. So we really need to change.
Yeah, and that's also the problem at this moment. The large cities locked in at this moment. Where
Yes.
do they get their food?
Yes, yes. And that is something I really was inspired at one point. I looked at the Netherlands. So if we see the whole Netherlands as one megacity, then it's all urban area from above Amsterdam to beyond Eindhoven. And then you see that horticulture and agriculture really has their place within that landscape. So they have a very special value in time. So it's like urban, rural, urban, rural, urban, rural. It's like completely integrated. In fact, it is a very green city producing more food than it needs itself. And that was inspiring, because that means that all the other mega cities can do exactly the same. So they can have the same ambition, because we already showed it is possible.
It's interesting, you saw Holland, the Netherlands, as a city, not as a country, but actually as a city that is able to provide actually much more than its own
Yeah.
food.
It is a small country, but it's quite nice sized city. If you compare it to New York or Shanghai or
Yeah.
Mumbai or Tokyo, then we are a very small city.
So you say that a city is able to provide its own food if you have the right setup of the city.
Yeah, and those cities are large. I'm talking about mega cities. And there are the developments of those super cities. If you go to the area, the metropolitan areas around New York, it's New York and Philadelphia, and so there are many cities and they're all growing together. So I'm really talking also large scale. It's not only, I think there will be a very nice mixture depending on the entrepreneurs themselves from what is for that region. How expensive is the land? Is there labor available? How can I deal with the energy? Is there water that I can use? You know, it is always based on the business model from the entrepreneur that wants to start it. And the one wants to do it large scale, and the other one wants a rooftop farm in New York because he has pretty nice connections with the local restaurants.
And the interesting thing is that everybody, the forecast is that many more people will go to cities for the coming years.
Anyway, I mean, that is the trend, and it's irreversible.
Okay. Let's have a look at the ideas being shared in your documentary. Henry Gordon Smith, an urban agriculture consulting company serving as an advisor to multiple agriculture tech startups. Maybe we should have first a quote from the documentary.
You don't build a city without the resources needed to feed the city.
Can you explain yourself? What do you mean by that?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So the quote was actually, we can't build cities without also building the resources needed to feed the people that live in them. And cities have a wide range of challenges today as they urbanize and as they grow in population. Affordable housing is an issue, transportation, et cetera. But the fact is that when we think about agriculture, agriculture, especially when brought closer to the city and involving technology, embraces the nexus of food, water, energy, and waste better than any other technology. So really the proposition that agritecture makes is saying, if we want to improve cities, we need to improve their food systems. We need to strengthen them. And we need to start by building that foundation from the very beginning. And we need to plan cities in a way and improve cities in a way that doesn't disconnect affordable housing from affordable food, for example.
In your opinion, what do they lack? What does the city lack at this moment?
Well, I think one of the major things that cities lack in the context of food is actually valuing the food and valuing agriculture as a use in cities. If we look globally, most cities don't actually have appropriate zoning to protect agricultural land. And so they get developed into impermeable pavements that affects heat island effect, that affects flooding, and that affects access to food. And so the very first step is saying that agriculture isn't something that's far away from the city. It's something actually that we need to restore back to the cities of olden days, where we actually had agriculture very close to our city because we didn't have a globalized society that we could just export that work, that productivity. So it starts by creating, again, that value of saying agriculture has a use in the city, farmers have value in the city, and we need a percentage of our city that produces food and a percentage of our population that knows how to manage, produce, market, and sell food as well.
What does a city need then? I mean, you mainly is talking about green belts. How should I look at these green belts?
Well, throughout the city, there's various areas that are potentially available to become productive through urban agriculture or local agriculture nearby. And I think one of the things that Miney is really spot on about is this idea of these green deltas, these swaths of land that kind of go through the city and around the city that tend to be more raw and natural. They tend to exist in most cities. Now, as those cities are developing rapidly, they're at threat. And those are areas where we have great opportunities to do green urban development, where we can develop larger scale farms, some of the energy and water systems that Miney referred to. And so that's one of the areas that we can consider. You know, you mentioned rooftops. There's also basement spaces, vacant spaces. There's even parts of parks that can be developed into more productive uses. So it's really about looking at the whole city as a canvas and then identifying the right best practices to match them. And what I think is really exciting about the Sustainable Urban Delta Foundation is this idea of a network of cities that can share these ideas and these best practices so they can look at their available land and say, okay, well, this is what we can do with our urban delta.
It's really about redesigning the city with food in your mind.
Exactly, and maximizing what's already there.
Yeah. Are there any examples for cities that are already, well, working in this way, thinking about these structures?
Well, certainly over the past 10 years that I've been involved in urban agriculture, we've seen a renaissance globally of interest in it, mostly driven by entrepreneurs that are excited about making a social impact. Now, the cities have been slower to catch up to that, but as they're responding to certain demand for healthier food and certain responses to climate change, there are some cities notable that are engaged in this. One of them would be the city of Paris, which has done a really good job to engage entrepreneurs and make the city and the spaces available in the city for development into green spaces through their Paris Culture urban agriculture competition. Now, it's not perfect, but there's lots we can learn from that example, specifically how much interest there was in actually developing urban farming businesses in the city, and just how many spaces they were able to find on government buildings, school buildings, and private institutions to develop that. I believe to date they've achieved 16 hectares of new urban farming space in the past 5 years, which is relatively significant for a city like Paris that is historical and has very difficult infrastructure to connect farming into, very bureaucratic. I think if we look at other cities, you know, we can look at Singapore and what they're doing to respond very aggressively to their import of food and the issues that they have there. What they've done is they've created really massive funding structures. They've actually done a really good job to focus on education, and there's new urban ag tech education programs, which are going to build that foundation that these cities need. And this is something that would be needed across the world, is directors at the policy level that can make those decisions and be the bridge between the farmers and the city itself to get those policies going.
Thank you for your contribution at this moment. People can see more of you in the documentary. You talk about education, which brings me to Dan Xiu. We also have a quote of him.
the mayor of the city, they want to know how can we do better for agriculture for Beijing? Because they realize if there's only 10% food is from Beijing itself, it's dangerous. It's not sustainable at all.
Hello, Dan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What is your company doing actually?
Well, actually, I'm a grower and I'm in charge of 3-hectare tomato greenhouse near Beijing. And we supply fresh food to the city on a daily basis, especially under such unusual circumstances.
The interesting thing is, you say in your quote that only 10% comes from, let's say, the area itself, and it's a large city, Beijing, I know. Why is it so dangerous?
Yeah, because you see, like, for the city like Beijing, there are like 10 million, 20 million people living in the city. But so for what we know, that only 10% of the food is produced nearby, and 90% of food you see is transported from hundreds and thousands of kilometers away. The urbanization is pushing the farmlands and the villages away from the big city, and especially when the coronavirus outbreak, logistics system has been influenced. Those foods which need to be transported from far away from Beijing cannot be reached, and people start to see that, oh, we have so less food produced nearby. What can we do?
Yeah. The interesting thing is you grow tomatoes, but you also provide education. I think 50,000 children are visiting your greenhouse.
There's a crisis, the crisis for food protection. And as many said, it's not a question about how to change, it's about when. I think it's time for us to make something different. And it can be done only if we reevaluate our food supply chain and integrate knowledges and technologies in food production. And if we think it will take more time, then inspire the next generation to show them that we can grow better tomatoes in this way, and give them the faith and let them join us. We have last year more than 10,000 students visited our greenhouse, and this year we are expecting more than 50,000 students will come.
Yeah.
And imagine if only 10% of them choose to study agriculture and join food production supply chain. I think after 10, 20 years, we are making something different.
Yeah. You try to create a new generation that is conscious about the role of food, having it close by in the city.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this moment. There's another small quote we have from Gary Wozniak. Let's hear about this quote as well.
If agriculture is going to be successful going into the future, you need bodies to staff the greenhouses. So why not bring the growing to the bodies as opposed to the bodies to the growing?
He is quite a figure. Can you explain something about him, Meini?
It's great what he does. I mean, Detroit was a disaster economically after the car industry there failing, and there were empty spaces in that city, and he started to discuss with the local government to get space to start an agri-hood, as you call it, and you will see it. But he's really having and creating jobs for people from different backgrounds, helping them with that. So there you see it is about food production and creating social coherence, and with then you see it is food production combined with education and training, and then you see of course with Henry that it is much more about helping to think out of different business models from out of the entrepreneur. So it is every time different, and it's very much depending So it's not providing a solution, huh? It's depending on the local situation,
yeah.
and the opportunities that are there. And I mean, we're now talking and showing examples about fresh food produce, like vegetables, what of course is most healthy for us all. But I mean, you can also imagine within urbanized areas combined with fish farming, or you have mini dairy factories just on the farmer's premises. So there are so many solutions or ways to build up the business models in a different way. You can be tomato grower and supply the energy to the local area, or reuse the wastewater from the city. So much more is needed, but also the creativity is also the basics for having the right business models at the end.
And would it lead towards a more, a nicer city? I mean, in terms of how you...
For me, it's a fact. A food producing city is a livable city. It boosts entrepreneurship and it creates livelihood, but it also does something with the social coherence at the end.
That's actually part of the story in your, the second or the third part. I don't know which one it's going to be.
The third one will be very much about creating those ecosystems.
Ah, right.
Yes,
Okay,
and
that's
there
good.
are nice examples from that too.
So I go to my other guest. He's probably in one of the others. Should I just go and stand here? Well, that's maybe a little bit close. I'll just stand here. Yeah, we have this 1.5 meter. Yes, you're Gerben van Straten. You're CEO of Wallace. Wallace is a company specialized in sustainable urban development.
Yes.
But why Wallace? Or what's Wallace?
What's Wallace? It's a company already for 30 years trying to focus on sustainable urban development. Even before I really understood what that was. Our name Wallace is actually coming from working in Canada, not just in cities. We also work with a lot of indigenous peoples in Canada, facing the same problems in their communities. And working with one of those groups for a long time, they decided to give me the name Wallace. Also, my first business partner was from that tribe, and so we started our business Wallace together in Vancouver. And she decided mainly that our company should be called after my local name, which is Wallace.
And you are into sustainable urban development. Mainly is talking about a livable city. Could you explain that a little bit more? How does a city become more livable?
Sustainable? For me, it starts with a quote of Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist, when she started thinking about cities in the 60s. And one of her quotes is, cities are ecosystems within the larger ecosystems of the earth. And I think at some point we forgot that actually there's ecosystems in cities as well. So we really started thinking about systems, water, waste, economic system, financial systems, and see how you really can build cities of the future, sustainable cities. And we found that actually food is a very key component. And where Mainie's passion started with the food and slowly thinking more about cities and systems, my passion is cities. So I really love cities. And if you really want to understand what you have to give people that live in cities, because cities are about people. They need to be healthy, it needs to be livable, cities need to be resilient, and the core is they need access to food, healthy food, close by, and not just by logistics, but having access, seeing where the food is grown and maybe participating in producing it. Yeah. If all systems work, because if you grow food, it's not just a food system. You have to think about water, you have to think about waste, you have to think about how people participate, how you do your logistics, everything around food, because it's a daily need, and it's the first need of people in the whole Maslow pyramid. So I think food is the key. And if you see cities where people grow food and people feel healthy, they go to a shop, not what we see in a documentary, that there's no fresh food in the supermarket, but if you go into each shop and it has fresh food, then there's something right about that city. So for us, seeing that fresh food and affordable food is a thermometer of how livable and resilient cities are.
Is there any good example of a city that...
Different ones. I think the most complex example at this point is how Singapore is doing it. And it's a little bit more government-driven. Of course, there's a lot of entrepreneurial input there as well. But I also think everything in Singapore, their tax system, their financial system, how citizens can contribute with their mortgage to support all those new systems in that city. I think that is a very great example of maybe preparing for the future of sustainability. It's a big challenge because you have to fight architecture and planning and banks and everything, but this is, I think, the way of the future, that at least we get access to places. Usually it's old places where there was old industry and now they're opening up. Big places where we have the critical mass for all those systems and where we also can make the difference.
Well, that's something for your next documentary, as far as I understood.
So that will be the third one, yes.
Yes,
sure.
that's very nice. Thank you very much. Actually, well, the world is quite a strange place. I mean, we produce enough food to provide, well, all the people in the world, actually even more, 10 billion people,
yes,
enough food.
Yes.
But we waste a lot. I
Yes.
mean, lost is being wasted as storage or doing transport, etc. How come that it's possible that we produce so much food and waste so much?
Yes.
Subsidies.
Yes.
That's your big issue as well.
Yes,
right?
that's my big issue.
Yeah. We have some quotes about that. Let's first hear Henry Gordon Smith about this issue.
Subsidies create unbalanced support for certain sectors of the economy without accurate consideration of their overall impact. And so what that means is that when innovation happens in other parts of the industry, other sectors that may have a lower carbon footprint, they may have a better job impact, or they may have a better health impact, they're not given a fighting chance to compete in the market because of the subsidies. Mm-hmm. If there's this behemoth agricultural system that's subsidized, and I'm an urban farmer, and I can create more yield per square foot and use less resources and reduce food miles, reduce carbon footprint, I can't compete simply because the product that I'm competing with in the marketplace is subsidized. And that product also doesn't reflect the actual impact that it's making, right? Because there's the externalities that aren't being charged for, or externalities that are being subsidized.
Yeah, we also have a quote of Danielle Hirsch. We have a quote of her as well.
Our tax payments, ours and many other people in the world, are used to sustain a industry that is destroying our planet. I mean, if I have to say it in a few words, that's what we are doing. So we are paying for this. We are paying for our own destruction. And I think there is no discussion anymore about whether we have to stop fossil fuel production. And still we're subsidizing it with public money. So it's a very bad situation. And I can also phrase it in a positive way, in the sense that imagine what we could do with that money, that amount of money, if it comes down to the public health sector, if it comes to education, if it comes to building sustainable cities, if it, it's such a big amount of money doing exactly what it shouldn't be doing.
And there's another quote, and that's one quote of you, which is quite good, I think.
Wij ontnemen met deze subsidiestromen zoveel landen in de wereld het recht om zichzelf verder te ontwikkelen. Dit is niet meer uit te leggen. We ontnemen met diezelfde subsidiestromen zoveel mensen het recht om een gezond leven te hebben. Dit is niet uit te leggen. We ontnemen alle mensen op deze wereld een toekomstperspectief op een mooi stukje groene aarde. Alleen maar omdat er een aantal instituten menen dat dit in stand gehouden moet worden. Leg mij dat maar eens uit.
Well, maybe you can explain that. Do you know how much it is that we subsidize?
The estimate of fossil fuels plus agriculture is about 7 trillion. That's a 7 trillion with 12 zeros. And of that amount, 6 trillion, sorry. Of that amount, a little more over 5 trillion goes to fossil fuels, and a little less than 1 trillion goes to the agriculture sector.
Which is well, I can't even imagine that amount of money.
And I was thinking about how can I explain, or how can we imagine it, but it's almost double the economy of Germany. We see Germany as a big economy in the world. It's almost double the entire economy of Germany. It's 7% of everything we earn with the whole world.
And what do we do with this money? I mean, we subsidize, but where do we spend it on?
We spend it on, we subsidize fossil fuel infrastructure. We subsidize certain types of agriculture, which are large scale, which are monoculture agriculture. So we destroy ecosystems through that kind of agriculture. And it's not only destruction of ecosystems, we kick people from their lands for that kind of agriculture. We make our food systems unhealthy because we produce unhealthy, very undiverse foods. So we finance, like Meini said, an unhealthy people and an unhealthy planet with that money.
You could even say we finance destruction.
Yes. In many different ways. Yeah.
So, I mean, that should be an enormous problem an obstacle for going to a sustainable world. I mean, if we subsidize, if that's the way humans act.
Yeah, so I think it's actually, if we realize that it's our money that's put into these systems, we can also decide that our money needs to be used differently. And that's exactly what's under debate right now. We're going to have already for corona measures, we have, through the World Bank, $250 billion available to do things with. So we can now put it in sustainable energy systems. We can finance sustainable cities and the things that are already existing that we were hearing about in these documentaries. So we can finance that. We can take money out of the destruction and put it into the creativity of people. We can put it in the things that are already out there and have proven that they can be done and be upscaled. So it's actually an advantage that it's our money, because if we decide that it needs to be used differently, we can just use it differently.
There is an idea. I mean, for example, Europe has this idea of a Green Deal, which is they intend to spend 1,000 billion euros actually in a Green Deal. Is that something to begin with?
That's definitely a step in the right direction, but it also implies that we need to get out of the black or grey economy that's driven by fossil fuels and unsustainable agriculture.
Would you say we now have, well, the opportunity to sort of rearrange this stream of subsidies?
Yes, we do. Yes. We have an opportunity, like in the short term, we have an opportunity to invest in the good stuff. And thereby showing that we can do it, because that's always a doubt. It's always said, well, we don't know where to find these projects and they're too small and da-di-da. Now we have all this money being put out, then we can show it can be done. And that will allow us to then divert the longer term subsidies from the fossil fuel sector, from the monoculture sector, to the things that we do want.
Thank you very much. Tom Rivett-Carnac, who was one of the organizers of the Agreement of Paris, said we are in the most important decade of humanity, actually. Do you agree with that?
Totally, yes.
Because we have to change.
Yes, and that's also, we have to change. So we cannot wait for the young people to change. It's us that are at the driving seat today. We are the only ones that can still make the change necessary on time to avoid a disaster.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, well, there's a lot to do, huh? This is your first documentary. Yes. There's more to come.
Yes. Yes, the second one would be really interesting. It will be especially about the current systems that we maintain. So it will be about what we are doing in this world with that subsidies. But also there it will be about the perspective. I mean, I believe that people can create a new world together. Huh? So I'm a believer that we can make it better. So also there you will see the opportunities that we can build together to avoid systems that are, I mean, very difficult to get through. And then the third one will be much more about those ecosystems, because where do you start? And it's not about developing plans. It is about starting to do it. Because everything is already available. And we do have those talented people that want to be entrepreneurial. And we have the ideas together. So it's more about doing. And many places in the world can show that, how they started building up this kind of ecosystems. And that is in Mexico, and it is in China, and it is in the Netherlands. And I just want to bring together all those stories.
Yeah, creating a new narrative,
Yeah.
actually.
To help cities
Yes.
to rethink the way they design. So the foundation itself wants to be the catalyst. There are enough initiatives to show and to kickstart and to help out and to push forward, and so that catalyst is needed at this moment. And our goal is to inspire city governments, architects, city planners, real estate developers, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial citizens, to just rethink the way cities are designed and embrace the idea that cities produce the food that they need. So it is just so beautiful to think about that what happens if those cities really integrating those green belts. I mean, we need green belts for available fresh food, for sustainable change, and at the end for livable cities. That is where the first documentary will be about. So I herewith like to introduce to you the first documentary of the Sustainable Urban Delta Foundation, called The City and the Green Belt.
Food. It is essential to us all. We buy and we consume. We try to eat healthily at best, if we have the luxury to choose. But there's a story behind the product that ends up on our plate. A hidden truth. Meet Manie Prince. She is not a politician. She is not an activist. She is a businesswoman. A woman who gradually developed an insight based on information that came to her during meetings with entrepreneurs and professionals in the fresh food industry all over the world. This input became a vision on how we design our cities and why cities should produce their own food. This is her story.
Mijn wereld en mijn reizen en mijn bezoeken bij klanten en de gesprekken die je hebt en de worstelingen die je ziet en de problemen waar mensen tegenaan lopen en weten dat je daar al gewoon oplossingen voor hebt, dat was wel echt een stukje frustratie wat omgezet werd in een enorme gedrevenheid, omdat je weet dat het er is. Dus het perspectief wat we hebben om ongelooflijke grote milieuproblemen wel op te kunnen lossen, dat is er.
The global infrastructure of how we grow, distribute and consume food today has a huge impact on our environment and our health. Long ago, we grew food close to our homes. Today, food travels thousands of miles, crosses borders. It has grown far away from our homes, in other countries, on a dazzling scale. We pushed our farmers away to build houses, shopping malls, hospitals, highways, schools. Our cities become larger and larger. But where did our food go? According to the UN, every day over 400,000 people move from the countryside to the city. Over 400,000, every single day. Megacities are pushing our farmland away. Our food comes from increasingly greater distances. It travels around the globe by plane, ship, or truck before being consumed. We take it for granted. We even consider the process irreversible. Maini tries to find the connection between the way we produce our food today and the problems we're facing, like climate change, pollution, food and water waste, lack of healthy food, hunger, and obesity. How can we make a difference? According to Maini, changing the way we design our cities and our food production can play a big role in solving many of these problems. A vision she now shares around the globe.
Het probleem is al groot genoeg. Dus laten we nou proberen om dat probleem wat dichter bij de mensen te brengen. En wat staat er nou dichter bij de mensen dan gewoon voedsel? Dus je dagelijks eten wat je hebt. En hoe mooi zou het zijn als we dat ook weer dicht bij diezelfde mensen brengen. En dat kan vanuit de verantwoordelijkheid van die stad vandaan. Dus in plaats van dat de stad constant eigenlijk die green belt wegduwt, dus daar waar voedsel werd geproduceerd voor de stad, drukt diezelfde stad dat maar weg met haar groei. Het zou geweldig zijn als diezelfde stad begint na te denken over hoe kunnen we dat nou integraal opnemen in grootstedelijke ontwikkelingen. En daarmee breng je de voedselproductie terug in de stad. En dat hoeft helemaal niet zo heel kleinschalig te zijn. Dat kan ook best honderden hectares zijn, want die metropolen zijn ook serieus groot.
A strong view. Maini is convinced of the advantages. She called this vision the Sustainable Urban Delta. But how did she develop this approach? Maini explains that it happened over the past years during her visits to customers abroad.
Mijn visie over deze Sustainable Urban Delta's is eigenlijk ontstaan door al mijn reizen. En het aanvliegen op die enorme grote steden heeft zo'n enorme impact gemaakt op mijn beleving van wat is nou een metropool en hoe groot is dat eigenlijk? Het gevoel dat je een uur lang over alleen maar gebouwde omgeving vliegt. Dat je er voor je gevoel geen eind aankomt en je alleen maar die lichtjes ziet van al die woningen en die gebouwen zo dicht bij elkaar. En wat de enorme uitdagingen zijn van die grote steden om dat allemaal maar te faciliteren. Hoe organiseer je dit? Dat is enorm. En dat die uitdagingen groot zijn, dat zie je dus ook in al die steden. Dus tijdens mijn bezoeken bij klanten of als je door die steden heen beweegt en ik ben bij mijn collega's die op internationale kantoren zitten, dan ervaar je zo'n stad. En je ervaart wat het is om ongelooflijk veel smog in te ademen vanwege alle vervuiling. En je weet wat het is als je een hotelkamer inkomt en het stinkt daar naar het riool. Maar hoe moeten die mensen dat allemaal ervaren? En op het moment dat je boven al die steden vliegt, op een gegeven moment ging ik op zoek naar de stukken groen om die grootstedelijke gebieden heen. Van waar is het omland gebleven? En je gaat het ook echt zien.
Wondering where the green farmland had gone, Maini started to study satellite images of cities. She collected data about greenbelts. Her conclusion was they are diminishing at an increasing rate. Try to comprehend these NASA pictures. Shanghai, the way it has expanded over the last 20 years, engulfing the farmland around it, with large areas becoming concrete. Then, Maini changed her focus.
Of je ziet Nederland. En dat was voor mij een eye-opener. Want aanvliegen op Nederland betekent dat je ook een stad ziet. En dat het een stad is met een aaneengesloten grootstedelijk gebied aan de westkust van Nederland. En wat je daar ziet is dat landbouw en tuinbouw een hele bijzondere plaats innemen in dat landschap van al die steden die naar elkaar toe groeien. En dat heeft zijn waarde gekregen in al die jaren. En die waarde is zo bijzonder dat we nemen dat zo aan als zoiets gewoons. Maar het is eigenlijk een stad die in staat is om zoveel voedsel te produceren dat het meer produceert dan dat het zelf nodig heeft.
Seeing her own country from above made Maini realize that megacities might be able to help solve their own problems and global climate change by embracing food production instead of pushing the farmland away. She realized that food can be a powerful tool. She shares her findings with audiences around the world. Maney is a guest speaker at the majestic New South Wales Parliament building in Sydney, Australia. Her audience is a combination of investors, business leaders, and politicians. Her speech takes off by summing up the latest technological innovations in food production. But then there is a twist in the plot. Maney starts emphasizing the consequences of our food production on climate change, pollution, food and water waste, lack of healthy food, hunger, and obesity. This is not what her audience expected. Sydney, Washington, Rotterdam, Ho Chi Minh City. Wherever Maney goes, she asks her audience, what can we do to counter these compelling issues?
So what's the plan? What is the plan? Many of our environmental problems are caused by the way we do food production today.
Then she sums up the solutions of the sustainable urban delta. Food produced differently, close to where people live, integrated within rapidly growing cities. By 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in cities.
And all those people need clean air, and they need safety, and clean water, of course, and also sufficient food.
The unprecedented growth of our metropolises might be a threat at first sight, but can also be seen as a window of opportunity.
It will be the century of the cities. The cities are becoming the policy makers of the future.
Cities can solve many of our environmental problems. Food production is pushed further and further away from the consumer. But it's not only due to the growing city. Many farmers are no longer able to survive in the countryside around the city and move to urban areas themselves for a better life.
Die greenbelts die verdwijnen. Het houdt op te bestaan. Waarom? Die steden rukken op en die steden drukken die greenbelts weg. De boeren die tot nu toe nog actief waren in die greenbelts, die zien geen toekomst meer. Die hebben geen perspectief meer. Dus dat verdwijnt. De meeste boeren die nu in die greenbelts nog actief zijn, en of je het nou over Sao Paulo hebt of je hebt het over Beijing. Maar kijk eens naar de leeftijd van die mensen. Ik bedoel, ze zijn 65 jaar, 70 jaar, zoals in Japan. Dus het verdwijnt, het houdt op. En dan heb je nog een veel grotere impact daarbovenop. En dat zijn die enorme klimaatveranderingen. Onderschat. Maar de klimaatimpact op de manier waarop we voedsel produceren vandaag, wat allemaal steeds grootschaliger moet en steeds meer centraal is in bepaalde gebieden die ineens geconfronteerd worden met serieuze klimaatveranderingen, dat raakt jou en mij. Mensen zien dat niet.
Maney takes us to Henry Gordon Smith in New York. An agricultural planner, Gordon Smith encourages cities to integrate food production in their planning.
We used to have our house and our farm, or at least our city and our farm around it. As cities developed, we were able to optimize, let's say, the exporting of those resources and the needs of our city. Right, to say we can centralize that in another place and import it cheaply with hydrocarbons and petrofuels. So that system developed for many, many decades, and that's done a good job in the sense that it really has reduced poverty globally, it's reduced hunger, it's not an extremely 100% negative thing, but there's been these externalities, the carbon footprint, the pesticide use, the disconnection from our food, which allows us not to understand what we're consuming and how those decisions drive sustainability or our impact on the world. And so I think that it's ironic and also kind of beautiful that we're trying to return to where we were and restore the original idea of cities, which is you don't build a city without the resources needed to feed the city.
Because we have been building cities without resources to feed their inhabitants, food needs to come from far away and travels all over the world. Our nutritious and tasty food is modified to be able to travel these long distances, says indoor farmer and investor Mike Zelkind.
You can't bring food 2,000 miles in a truck, offload it in some distribution center, have it sit in the sun or in the cold, go through all those temperature zones, have it move through all the distribution centers in this complex supply chain that we have built with 14 different hands touching the food, and still have it come to you tasting great. We've really corrupted our food supply chain.
Like here in California. Salinas Valley, the so-called salad bowl of the US. More than 600,000 acres of fruit and vegetables. Every day, hundreds of trucks leave with tons of fresh produce, to arrive days later in cities all over the continent, like here on the East Coast near New York City. And then there's climate change, which makes problems even bigger. In California, it has been too dry for years. Salinas is drying out, a drought that is having a devastating effect.
Dus er is geen water meer. Dus valt de productie terug. Dus zitten de andere staten naar lege schappen te kijken in de supermarkten.
This is the situation Mike Zelkind wants to change. He wants fresh and healthy food to be grown close to the city.
Our goal is to really change the way the world eats. Our goal is to bring back the food supply to the local communities, to the cities, to the areas where people reside, and make that food supply as good as it can possibly be, so that communities, cities, local areas can become self-sustainable again.
Making cities self-sustainable again by restoring our connection to food. It's exactly what Dan Su does on his farm close to Beijing. Every year, up to 50,000 school kids visit his farm to see how the vegetables are grown. Dan Su started his farm because he realized how important it was for Beijing to have access to its own freshly produced food.
Before we start this program, there is one question bothered me a lot, is for a city like Beijing, there are 22 million people, but 90% of the food are imported, not imported, are coming from other provinces, like Hebei, like Shandong, like Henan. Only 10% is from Beijing. So how can we ensure that the people will get enough fresh, high-quality food? And we are talking about 22 million people.
Dan Su noticed that he had attracted the attention of the Beijing City Council, who realized how dangerous it is when a megacity is not self-sustainable when it comes to food.
Actually, yesterday, we had a conversation in this room with the government from the city, the agriculture sector. And they came us is this also to the mayor of the city. They want to know how can we do better for agriculture for Beijing? Because they realize if there's only 10% of food is from Beijing itself, it's dangerous. It's not sustainable at all.
Integrating food production in the city again. Dan Su was able to start his business with private money. But how can we make the city embrace its food production when land is expensive and scarce? Are cities interested in large-scale urban agriculture? Henry Gordon Smith, who helps large cities integrate agriculture solutions, is convinced they are.
We're trying to work with cities around the world to do something called scenario analysis for local food systems. So we can take areas of the city and we can lay out our urban agriculture models and estimate scenarios for food security in that city. Plugging in greenhouses of different size, plugging in rooftop farms, plugging in basement community gardens. All these models I've been talking about, we have them in a data form, and so we can lay them out. And cities need a data-driven approach for planning anyway. They use scenario analysis for planning roads, they use it for planning new developments, they just don't use it for agriculture yet. So we're trying to fit into their existing mechanism of planning and say, this is what the actual metrics are. Let's not talk about a green kind of vision. Let's talk about the yields. Let's talk about the jobs. Let's talk about the carbon footprint. Let's talk about the resiliency score of this system. So, that's our vision as far as our work goes with cities and how we can encourage people to pursue the sustainable urban delta.
But there is another factor that plays a crucial role. Worldwide, governments continue to subsidize their traditional industries, the fossil fuel and agricultural sectors, with astronomical amounts of money.
Het idee alleen al dat we met elkaar op een gesubsidieerde manier, waardoor brandstoffen zo goedkoop zijn dat het rendabel is om soja uit Brazilië naar Europa te transporteren, om hier onze kippen en varkens en koeien mee te voeren, terwijl we ook nog subsidies geven in Europa om land braak te laten liggen, te vergroenen, onze landbouw. Terwijl natuurlijk met diezelfde subsidiestromen we zouden kunnen stimuleren dat je andere vormen van veevoer gewoon hier in Europa kan produceren. Dat is waanzin. We helpen voor $5300 miljard per jaar de fossiele industrie aan betere winsten, terwijl dat echt funest is voor het klimaat op deze aarde en datzelfde klimaat ervoor zorgt dat onze eigen voedselproductie in gevaar komt, waardoor als wij op deze manier doorgaan miljarden mensen honger hebben tegen 2050. Wie heeft dit bedacht?
And the consequences of moving all this food around is that much of it is wasted. In the US, for instance, research shows that 40% of the food grown on US soil is lost.
Kan je het je voorstellen?
Food is being wasted, but at the same time there are still areas that don't have enough fresh food. In these food deserts, people have very little access to fruit and vegetables. Like here in Anacostia, a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. Food deserts are a worldwide phenomenon. The poorer the neighborhood, the less access to fresh produce. Kafini, a local resident, takes us to the only supermarket in the area serving a community of 60,000 people. In the United States, there are cities where 25% of the population lives in food deserts. Their residents eat fast food most of the time. Daria Shakan is an internist in Camden, a town near Philadelphia. To her astonishment, she observes that people in Camden do not eat vegetables. They're not available. The physical consequences are obvious.
So in children, we see failure to thrive or malnutrition because a small child who eats a diet that is mostly simple carbohydrates isn't getting the protein they need to grow. So a lot of my small children are really underweight and struggle to gain weight. And then as they get a little older, once they get a little bit more protein, then they're eating foods that are packed with fats and simple sugars, and then they often become obese. And then my adult population, if you want me to go into that, I can, but hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and actually increasingly in children, I'm seeing type 2 diabetes, elevated blood pressures, high cholesterol.
We hebben op dit moment wordt er voldoende voedsel geproduceerd in de wereld om 1,5 keer het aantal mensen te voeden wat er op dit moment leeft op aarde. Dat betekent dat we genoeg voedsel hebben voor meer dan 10 miljard mensen. Dus het probleem is niet dat het voedsel er niet is. Het grote probleem is de ongelooflijke inefficiënte manier waarop dat voedsel wordt geproduceerd. En vervolgens wordt getransporteerd via vrachtwagens, schepen, vliegtuigen naar andere plekken in de wereld. Het grote probleem is de voedselverspilling.
This can be changed if cities take the lead in stimulating local food production. Food is produced further away from consumers than ever before, grown in endless monoculture farms, which makes it difficult for farmers to survive. Like here in Western Australia. Ben Cole is an environmental engineer and farmer. He witnesses how this part of the world is deteriorating.
Large-scale farming is really focused predominantly on monocultures. So it's really about planting one crop and then replacing it with another crop the next year and doing that year on, year out. So an example might be wheat and then canola, wheat and then canola, wheat and then canola. With that, you get real challenges around your soil fertility because you're using the same crops year in, year out. And of course the pests, both in the soil but above ground and the weeds, they get to really know the chemicals that you're using. So it's really quite a sort of a spiral down. It's very high salinity encroaching, the overall global context of climate change, and financially, you know, farming isn't as viable as it used to be. Farmers need to buy their neighbour's farm and their neighbour's 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 farm. Effectively, the mantra is go to scale or leave, get out.
This vicious circle can be stopped. Cities should take the lead in that process. This way, circularity would be one step closer. In Melbourne, Australia, Maney explains how megacities can be enablers for the circular economy.
Focus on the future means that it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be circular, it needs to be connected to the ones who are eating your food. And I think there is a very nice opportunity if we think about urbanized areas and how to integrate that green belt that normally was around the cities and we were pushing away where it's not nice to live. Huh? So if we can integrate from the moment that we start thinking about it, you bring food production closer to the people, you can reuse the water from the city for food production, you can balance your energy sources, you can think about new business models. So I'm not only tomato producer, but I also deliver you the electricity. Or I'm not only the one who's producing the computers, but I use the wastewater from the city. That is the first start of the circular economy. So my belief is more and more that when you implement this, so when you bring it close to where people live, it is the most easy, most tangible way of starting to create the circular economy that we so badly need.
Inventiveness and creativity. Maney sees more and more inspiring business models around her, as both technological possibilities and social awareness increase. In Sydney, Australia, Maney meets Johan Havinga and Sharon Markulin. These entrepreneurs devised a unique business concept, combining growing fish and vegetables. The actual key to their success remains a secret.
I can't tell you, it's in our IP. It's how we bring various elements together to create an organic process that allows us to use the waste of the barramundi to provide a fertiliser in growing organic plants. And how we do that is the magic between the start and the end.
Creating smart relationships between growers and consumers. Gotham Greens in Brooklyn, New York, is the ultimate example. They built greenhouses on top of supermarkets, growing food close to where it's sold.
We've really scaled over the past few years and now we'll have almost 500,000 square feet of state-of-the-art urban greenhouse around the country. So it's been very rewarding to see the concept being proven from an idea into a sustainable commercial enterprise with hundreds of employees and a great vegetable brand that's now available in thousands of supermarkets across the United States.
Bringing food production back to the city. It would have a great advantage and restore balance on many levels. It would make a difference all around the world, for megacities on all continents, like Africa, where more and more food farmers are moving to the city.
A lot of these people have been moving into urban areas because food production in this country is no longer commercially viable. They're not just going to sit there and starve and die in those days. They're going to move to where they believe they can make a living. And that's what is essentially happening at the moment. So if we want to stem it and we deal with these things, you've got great opportunities for, if you want, the green belts within the city. You've got great opportunities for those who are still in the rural areas to produce the food that we need.
All around the world, cities continue to expand without including food production in their planning. But we also see citizens who are actively trying to make a change by initiating small but powerful projects.
So, have you seen inside yet?
No, not yet.
It's still,
no, please.
It's still under construction a little bit,
yeah,
but it's coming along.
Kafini, who we met in the food desert of Anacostia, shows us the small community farm that was started in her neighborhood.
Like being able to provide food to the greater community.
Providing the vegetables that are lacking in the supermarket.
You know what I'm saying? I like some vegan dishes. I like a lot of vegan dishes because I don't like cheese.
In Australia, we see a hopeful initiative of money moving in a different direction. Environmental engineer Ben Cole managed to find investors, allowing him to take his collective of organic farmers to the stock market.
This photo was taken 6th of July, a very happy day for me and Wide Open Agriculture, when we formally listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So I like to think it sort of sets a pathway for other companies, other young companies that are interested in listing, to say, oh, we don't have to only talk about money. Obviously money is very important. Financial success is a very important measure of productivity. But what about all those other things that give us our social license to operate, our impact on communities and farmland?
Martin Gramco in California found a smart way to fight the local shortage of water.
What you can see in this graph here, that all night long, this red line is showing very little water need. The plant is slowly drying out. This is the green line telling us how much water is available to the plant. And then it starts to wake up, and you can see it start to use water. That's the red line. This is how much it's actually using.
This approach allows Gramco to achieve the maximum yield. By purifying wastewater from the city and adding the necessary nutrients, he manages to water his plants in this dry area.
You can see there we have 2 large tanks.
Yeah.
And then we have these 4 smaller tanks. We blend about 10 parts of the recycled water to 1 part of groundwater.
Wow.
Into each one of these tanks. Each one has its own blending station, and while we're doing that, we're adding our organic feed. And then it stops.
Local initiatives, large and small, are popping up in more and more cities. Detroit is a unique story, a beautiful initiative.
We had 1.9 million people in 1951. It's the height of our population. And today we're at about 630,000. So we've lost 2/3 of our population. If agriculture is going to be successful going into the future, you need bodies to staff the greenhouses. So why not bring the growing to the bodies as opposed to the bodies to the growing?
Detroit. Once thousands worked in its 52 car factories. Now only 2 factories remain. But the city is not dead yet. Grassroots efforts are being made to shift from steel and rubber to soil and seeds.
So we are where ground zero. So this is where our first greenhouse is going to go. It's going to cover 2 acres of land. It's going to go from the alley over there to the street that way. And it's going to go from the street behind me to the street that's on the other side of this building that's not torn down.
Recovery Park aims at producing all kinds of vegetables for the neighborhood on a large scale. Gary has big ambitions. The tech of Greenhouse Future is being beta tested.
This is a beta project for us. It's a test on growing leafy greens in a hydroponic pond. When we take this pond and we transfer the technology under a glass greenhouse, and Mother Nature's bringing in free sun, our product will become very, very financially viable.
Gary aims at using the workforce available in the neighborhood. Veterans, people recovering from addictions, and former prisoners are all welcome to apply at Recovery Park.
My name is Tony Taylor. I work for Recovery Park Farms as an associate. I've been working here for a little over a year. I came out of prison after 33 years, and Recovery Park was the first job offer that I had, coming out of prison. And they have been very, very supportive. Got the job, I got my own apartment, car. I'm about to get married, so it's been pretty smooth. And Recovery Park has helped that a lot because I'm here and I'm doing this work, and I know that this is a place that, I'm needed, to see something begin to grow, and then at the end, you actually see the end product of something that you help produce. Is fulfilling.
I call it an agri-hood. So it's a neighborhood all based on agriculture. Almost all of it hydroponic, almost all of it distributed to restaurants within a 300-mile radius around Detroit, and creating close to 300 jobs, paying an average wage of $22 an hour plus benefits. I mean, that's good money. I didn't set out to change the world. I'm not a hero. I'm not trying to be one. I'm just Gary, and I'm just trying to give back.
Investors should be encouraged to broaden their scope, to use valuable soil for different purposes, like food production. Business models like these could solve many problems for expanding cities.
If cities are starting to take their responsibilities and integrate their green belts into urbanized areas, that the real estate investors are becoming the growers of tomorrow, solving many social and environmental problems. And at the end, I believe, because it's so close by to the first needs of people, it is also a nice way to start the circular economy and create this kind of new communities within those enormous metropolitan areas. Thank you very much.
I think that you need people to spruik the future and to look at the present problems, because most of us in the academic environment know it. We can see what's happening, but it's a matter of getting that message out clearly and articulately.
It was so inspirational. It was challenging and thought-provoking, and what I love most of all is the optimism for the future. Mm-hmm. We're so used to the doomsday people who come along and say, well, this is going to change, it's the end of the world, and we're ruining this and we're ruining that. But as Marnie quite correctly pointed out, that there's so much opportunity there, and we are an intelligent race, and therefore we can solve problems. And that's what I took away from the talk today, is that as long as we are smart and then we incorporate it, we can take power and do things ourselves.
You look at all the problems in today's world, you look at how it's structured and how the problems keep repeating themselves, such as food production. So it's easy to get cynical and think that there's no change coming. And that was the beauty of the talk today, is that Marnie pointed out that I think we're going to see some disruptions across the globe, both due to technical and social changes. So that feeds you with a bit of optimism, thinking about that there will be disruptions. And let's make sure these disruptions contribute to the global economy and also to the global well-being.
Washington, New York, Beijing, Sydney. All around the world, we see inspiring examples of initiatives that are creating sustainable urban deltas. Maney hopes more and more cities will reconsider the integration of food production in order to create a more sustainable future for our megacities. And meanwhile, slowly but surely, pioneers around the world are creating a global movement.
Waar zien we die voorbeelden waar dit gewoon aan het gebeuren is? dat die steden wel die verantwoordelijkheid naar zich toe aan het trekken zijn. Dat ze ruimte aan het creëren zijn voor voedselproductie in de stad. Dat ze ondernemerschap helpen stimuleren. Dat je kan zien dat er nieuwe sociale coherentie ontstaat. Dat ook de arme wijken in de steden weer een nieuw perspectief krijgen, omdat ze dit soort initiatieven mogen oppakken. Dat mensen mogen leren van elkaar. Dat er nieuwe initiatieven ontstaan waarbij zelfs wordt gekeken naar hoe kunnen we die circulaire economie rondom voedselproductie beginnen. Hoe kunnen we afvalwater uit de stad hergebruiken voor voedselproductie? Of kan ik tomaten telen, maar ook energie leveren aan de woonwijken in de buurt? En de stad die beseft dat zij zelf voedsel zal moeten produceren voor de mensen in die stad. Op een duurzame manier.